But yeah, we manage. It's a secret plan, yeah. It might just be like, I just now going away. It could be just like. No, it's like, it's not very complicated, right? No. So, I trimmed it down to even less complicated. Start at 32. Well, I have to do it because it's, you have it as a tab. I have a separate browser. It's its own browser. You have a separate, like a whole separate instance? Yes. But it's really just a browser. You want to drive it first? I can do well, yes, because you're going to do the rest. That's what I'm asking. That's why I'm asking. Is it working? Did you inspect now? Did you inspect now? No. Why is this long? Okay. No, it's not. Maybe he's picking up from over here. I have no idea where that leads from. It's like your brain, probably. I haven't actually had a chance to see how good or bad it is. It's nice. Mediocre. It's a remote human. No, is it a remote human? I don't think so.
In certain cases, there's I think 1 or 2 feet where it's human and in other cases it's auto transcription.
Okay. But Whisper, OpenAI Whisper is actually really good.
Okay, so we're at 32. We've given people a chance to polish off their coffee, and we'll go ahead. So welcome to the OpenPGP session at IETF116. If you're in the wrong room, this is a good chance to leave, but don't, because there's not that many of you. So as usual, we have a note well that you should note well. I guess you've all seen this. Give you another moment to enjoy it. We're in a hybrid meeting, so please scan the QR code. Although I can't actually use the excuse that we might get a bigger room the next time, I guess. So we can't get a smaller one, that's okay. So yeah, but please do join the Meet Echo either by scanning the QR code or joining the Meet Echo tool with on your phone or on your laptop. And again, remote folks are joined. That's how we do the blue sheets.
And we are being recorded.
And we're being recorded. If you're remote, please mute and do all the right things with headsets as usual. With this meeting, obviously, if you're physically present, we need to be wearing masks, and everybody seems to be doing that really well. Thank you. And the IETF Code of Conduct says to be nice, but we're a nice crowd, so that's okay with this group, I think. Do also, because we have this transcription thing, if you're at the microphone or if you're remote and speaking and sending audio, please do say your name, because I think these transcripts do get stored somewhere and might be useful. And they're more useful if you say your name first.
And put yourself in the queue even if you're in the room.
Yeah. And speaking of names, I'm Stephen Farrell, one of the chairs, and
I'm Daniel Kahn-Gilmore, the other chair. Okay.
So our agenda is we have the crypto refresh doc draft, which is almost done. We'll basically just very quickly describe the updates from 7 to 8. Daniel will do that. There's some open merge requests that there's a couple, but one really that requires discussion. I think that's about it, is it?
give people a heads up. There's a bit more discussion on each of these points. But yeah, the open merge requests are they're very subtle, and there's not a lot of there's no wire format changes, for example. It's basically guidance tweaking.
So we're new there. And then after that, basically, so that'll take as long as it takes because finishing the chartered work is what we have to do. Then there's some work on interoperability and test suites that Daniel and Justice, I think, is going to talk to that too. Just reporting on interoperability and where we are. And then in optimistic mode, we're going to assume that we do finally get the publication request hit on the crypto refresh. And then it seems sensible to take the opportunity to allow people to discuss some of the possible rechartering topics that have been raised previously on the list or otherwise in issues or whatever.
Yeah. Do we have a note taker? Did you get a note taker before I got it?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't. He just volunteered. So thanks doubly. So that's our agenda. Anybody want to bash the agenda? Not seeing anybody in the queue from remote or in the room. We'll assume that's good. So the other thing is, because we're kind of almost done, but we've been almost done for a month, and we have this danger of, dotting the last I's and T's, causing us to create more I's and T's that we need to dot. I think what we're going to propose, but we'll do that at the end of just before we start talking about interoperability. What we're going to propose to see if people are okay with it is basically to let Daniel and Paul Wouters, our main editor for the draft, kind of free to do a couple of weeks worth of editorial changes and tidying up and fixing IANA considerations and whatnot. With reporting to the list, but without starting a discussion or a merge request for each minor change, just to get those last bunch of things done. So you can think about whether you think that's a good, bad, or indifferent idea, and we'll ask again just before we get to the interoperability thing when we've seen all the various changes. So the plan we're suggesting, and see if people are okay with it, is essentially after this meeting, when we have the notes from it, Paul and DKG will, hopefully in a couple of weeks, they say, get all of the last few I's and dotted and T's crossed that we need. And then we'll have another rev of the draft, give the working group a few days to look at it, and then hit that publication request button, because we're that close, and adding more kind of mailing list cycles and merge request or GitLab issues at this point is probably going to be just add another month for no good reason. So that's a suggestion. If you're okay with that, we'd appreciate you letting us know that later. If you have a problem with it, please do express those problems later on in the agenda.
And remember that when we get it done, we can recharter. So please don't, if you're like, oh, I've got this great idea, don't try to jam it into the draft now.
Well, yeah, you can try, but the answer is no. So hopefully that's clear enough for everybody. If anybody wants to ask a question about that now, go ahead, but we will bring it up again so you can sit and ponder it for a while. Okay, so that's our chair slides, and moving on. This is DKG is going to present summary of recent changes. I think that's the slide deck, isn't it?
So yeah, I'm going to present high-level view of some of the changes, and then probably the largest recent change is going to be presented by Daniel Huygens. Sorry, I feel like I keep mangling your name, Daniel, but he'll do that presentation remotely. So just to next slide, Stephen. So top-level view. Since -07, -08 is out now. We moved from version 5 to version 6 for interoperability. We discussed that at the last IETF. We basically agreed to do it. That's done. We changed the signature trailer length field width from 8 octets to 4 octets to avoid a weird aliasing thing that Demi-Marie Obenauer found. We bound the V6 signature salt size to the hash algorithm for version 6 signatures. That addresses a concern that I believe Aaron Whistler raised and preps us to be able to handle post-quantum stuff. We explicitly forbid the use of El-Gamal with the new encrypted, the new data encryption format. we tweaked the way that clear text secret keys are stored in version 6 to not have this useless checksum, which just makes v6 a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier. We added explicit new public key algorithms for the CFRG X25519 and X448, which is what Daniel will present on in a second. And in 07, we also introduced a novel form of padding in PKESK for 25519 and X448. That was a matter of a little bit of discussion and contention after 07 was released, 08 was released. So Stephen, next slide. So 08 was released a little while ago before the cutoff. And in the discussion that happened since then, we removed the custom padding for v3pk ESK for the new CFRG key exchange mechanisms, and instead moved to using clear text symmetric algorithm choice there. And we added a little bit of guidance on how to handle the regex packet with the null terminator there. So those are the only substantive changes that are sitting in Git at the moment. Next slide.
That's the last slide.
That's the last slide. Great. So that's the rough overview of what was done. Hopefully you followed all of that on the list or in GitLab. If you didn't, this is just a heads up to you now. And I'm going to turn it over to Daniel to talk about the X25519 and X448 choices here. Daniel, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. I'll ask to.
So Daniel, should I pass you control of the slides, or should I do next? Do you want to tell me to move them along?
I'll control them if that's okay.
Let me just do that. Okay, and then just to be clear, that the stuff DKG just presented there was all discussed on the list already, so that's why we were so brief with it. Okay, Daniel, so go ahead.
Yes, thanks a lot. So I'll start by giving a very brief history to kind of explain how we ended up here. So a long time ago in 2012, ECC was added to OpenPGP. And that only had the NIST curves. And then in 2016, EDDSA with ED25519 was added. In 2017, curve 25519 over ECDH was added. Both of these in drafts only. And they were using sort of custom OIDs under private enterprise domains, and these were sort of non-standard and specific to OpenPGP, or at least they weren't used anywhere else. And then in 2018, an RFC was released for the OIDs in X509, and these were never updated in the drafts for OpenPGP. So we sort of ended up with this inconsistent state, let's say. And then in the design team, sort of last year, there was some discussion about moving to the new OIDs, but since there was already a very large body of curve 25519 keys out there, we decided against it. But then at FOSDEM in February of this year, there was some, we were talking about it again, and then also on the working group mailing list, there was again some discussion about this. And there it seemed like there was more interest in switching to the X509 OIDs. However, at that point, at least to me, it seemed better to switch to entirely new algorithm IDs so that we could also clean up some of the other quirks with the usage of curve 25519 in OpenPGP, such as the big endian versus little endian swap compared to the RFCs, and the encoding of key material in MPIs. So then I propose to define new algorithm IDs for these curves. So I'll now describe those algorithm IDs. So first of all, there's two for ED25519 and ED448 that are very simple. They just hard code the length of the keys and the signatures on the wire. They're encoded directly in native format with no other special encoding. So no MPIs are used. Then X25519 and X448 are similarly meant to be quite simple, but slightly more involved. So again, hard-coded lengths and no MPIs. Also no padding, since at least for SCIPDV2, we don't need to encode the symmetric algorithm ID in the session key, and the session key is always a multiple of 8 octets. And since the symmetric algorithm ID is in clear text in the SCIPDV2 packet, then there's no use in no need and no use in padding the session key, since so in V3 PKESK and V1 SCIPD, since the symmetric algorithm ID was hidden, then there's some well, the idea was that you could hide the size of the session key, right? But I think the added value of that is fairly low, and if you're worried about that, then you can just use the largest key size, use AES256, and sort of be done with it. Though there's one quirk that I'll get to in the next slides. No padding and no 2-octet checksum, since there is already an 8-octet checksum in the AES key wrap algorithm. So that checksum was unnecessary as well. So we moved that into each of the specific algorithms, since previously it was there for all algorithms in the PKESK packet. Then instead of the key derivation function that ECDH uses, the KDF here is much simpler. It's just an HKDF over the shared key with a hard-coded info parameter. And then the session key is encrypted using that, using AES key wrap. That part is still the same as ECDH. All right, so then one wrinkle was brought up on the mailing list or on GitLab about how do you use these algorithms with the V3 PKESK, because there you still have the symmetric algorithm ID with the session key, so then it's not a multiple of 8 octets, so you either need some padding or find some solution. So the original proposed solution, as was released in 2007, as DKG mentioned, was to add some padding, but there were well, the padding scheme was let's say a bit ad hoc and non-standard. So Eustace and also I were not super happy with it. So I proposed to instead just leave it unencrypted, since there's no padding. Then also encrypting it has little added value, since yeah, you can derive most of the information from the length of the session key. However, there is one additional wrinkle which Aaron pointed out, which is that if you leave it unencrypted, then an attacker could also change it and try to make a recipient decrypt the message under a different symmetric algorithm than it was encrypted with. And if one of them is very weak for some reason, or a non-standard algorithm is used or implemented perhaps, then that could theoretically lead to issues. So one idea there could be to say that we can only use AES in this context, and just say that if a message is encountered with a different algorithm in this context, then we just reject the message. So that's one idea. Could be other ideas as well, but yeah, that's sort of the state right now. So there's one other sort of subtlety with these new algorithms, which is that the recipient fingerprint is no longer bound to the PKESK, unlike in ECDH. So this means that there's no guarantee that the message was specifically encrypted to your key. However, in a sense, you don't ever really have that guarantee unless you have the intended recipient fingerprint in a signature in the signed and encrypted message, which says that this message was encrypted for your key. So, in other words, if you're gonna implement these new algorithms, please also implement the intended recipient fingerprint signature subpacket. So not having it in the KDF actually also has another benefit, because it makes automatic forwarding easier, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in one of the proposed topics for the recharging. Yeah, I think that's about it. So any questions about these algorithm IDs?
So what's the state of this change? Is this in a merge request or?
So most of this is in fact merged and is on Git. So there's this small thing about potentially mandating AES that has not been done since Aaron pointed this out to me yesterday. So I will probably make a merge request if that seems like a reasonable solution to everyone.
And I'm not seeing lots of people jumping up and down with delight or with horror. I think it's a little bit detailed for probably most people's buffers. Can you characterize what you mean by mandating using AES? I mean, what's that using it for? What?
Yeah, so that would mean, like, if you're encrypting to a mixture of keys, one of which is one of these new algorithms, right? So X25519 or X448, and another one is, let's say, a legacy key that doesn't support SCIPDV2, which means that you have to use SCIPDV1 with a V3 PKESK, right? Then you have to leave the symmetric algorithm ID unencrypted in the V3 PKESK in this scenario, or well, as it is in the Git repo right now, which means that then after encrypting the message, someone could change the symmetric algorithm ID, right? And then on decryption, the the implementation would use a different algorithm, which might be bad, potentially. So the idea would be to say, in that scenario, you have to use AES, and then if you use something else, the decrypting implementation would reject the message.
Can I try a shorter summary of what your proposed change is?
Yes.
If you're using the new key, the new style of key, you're encrypting to the new style of key, but you're using the old style of encryption,
Mhm.
then you need to use AES for that.
Right.
Right. So that's the requirement that's in place. Basically, it's saying, look, we don't expect you to use the old style of encryption with this new key, but there are some circumstances where you might be obliged to do that. And if you are obliged to use the old encryption style with the new encryption key, because, for example, you're encrypting to a group of recipients and not everyone has the new key, then you should use AES as the symmetric cipher to avoid this potential for some sort of cross-protocol attack.
Oh, okay. So
we're carving out a little corner case of a corner case and saying, if you land here, use this particular standard to avoid a potential other problem. But the problem doesn't exist outside of that corner case of that corner case.
Okay. And
so Daniel, will you put a merge request for that and send mail to the list with the specifics for it in the next day? Great.
so, okay. Yes. Yours.
Hi, I'm Joris. So I don't have much knowledge about, or I'm not deep into the topic at all, but would that mean just to cover this corner case of a corner case using the AES version is the safest way to go? Is that then the preferred method? Because I would cover all the cases, even this small corner case? From a practical point of view, I would say.
You're saying to require AES, period.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you say, okay, usually you don't need to use the AES, but there's a corner case of a corner case where it's important. So in general, I would then say, okay, I just use AES.
So the trouble with that, well, I don't know, Daniel, do you want to answer?
Well, as an implementation, you can make that choice, right? You can always use AES and be safe. The question is just whether we need to mandate that in the spec, right? Or whether we need to mandate it only in the corner case, I guess.
So, but again, I think everybody having the right context here is probably part of the trick.
Yeah, okay.
Falco,
Which
you're
I don't.
queued?
Yeah, Falco Strinske. My question is, what is really the concern about the cross-algorithm attacks? Because, I mean, the attack that would apply here is a symmetric algorithm that is so weak that by the decryption result, you reveal the secret key, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't matter. Yeah, I've never heard
Yes,
of this.
yeah,
This is
I
really,
agree. It's
really-
unlikely, but yeah.
And again, just for clarity, when you say mandate using AES, you mean having in those particular messages no other symmetric cipher.
Right.
That seems a little bit over the top for a very niche corner case, perhaps.
On the other hand, if you're in the niche corner case, you probably want to be using AES anyway. Like this is not a corner case where you're going to want to be deploying your fancy new crypto algorithm. If you're deploying the fancy new crypto algorithm, the fancy new symmetric cipher, you're probably deploying it with a get to send to someone who has a modern key. So you're not going to be needing to do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, make the merge request and we can discuss this on the list.
All right.
But we don't want to have a month's worth of discussion.
Right.
So
So make it as minimal as you can. Minimal and simple as you can and clear.
yes, so I think that in the merge request, the extent to which you're mandating using a specific algorithm should be minimized, I think. So only say mandated for that subset of a subset.
Okay.
Okay, so
Will
with
do.
that, again, does anybody else want to chime in on that particular topic?
Stavros, I wonder if you can take your comment and raise it by voice, because I'm not sure I understand it.
Yes. Do you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So Stavros Kousidis, I just wanted to ask the key derivation when you perform X25519 or X448, it just takes the shared point, right, or coordinate. It doesn't include the ephemeral exchanged points.
Yes, indeed. It just contains the shared key.
Okay. Yeah, this is just the question because there is a sentence in RFC 7748 that specifies those algorithms. It says that the parties can use also the exchange parts to include them into the KDF.
Mhm.
This has some kind of security consideration behind it. So that was just a question. So it's basically heading at chosen ciphertext attacks, which we considered in the PQC draft. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
So I think that
Stavros, are you trying to say that the current implementation should change how it does the key derivation?
From my point of view, yes. I don't want to delay your process. This is also what I would like to point out, right? I don't think that the change would be heavy, but maybe you should give it a thought. So what it's the reason behind this is this then a version that is called hashed Elgamal key encapsulation that is proven by Kramer and Chub to be CCA2 secure. So it has very strong security guarantees. Yeah, and it's noted in the ROC that specifies those X algorithms.
So,
but it's not a must, right?
Do you think that if we have the intended recipient fingerprint in the signature before encryption, that sort of covers the same guarantees, or no?
I don't know, to be honest.
Because yeah, so the downside of including it there in the KDF is that then we again for automatic forwarding have to do something special. Which okay, I guess we still need to discuss later on whether it will be in scope for the rechartering. But yeah, that was the idea of doing it like this.
Okay, thank you.
So I also don't want, sorry, Aaron, you're in the queue.
So I think it all boils down to whether we want the CA2 security or not. Because the kind of attack that you can have here is someone having a different plain text, different ciphertext, and just submitting it to some oracle that is able to decrypt it, and then use that ciphertext to decipher the original ciphertext. So basically, someone that is able to transform the ciphertext, get a decrypted version of it, and then reuse it to decrypt the key wrap that is being done. So this is like in some scenarios, this might be relevant, like the smart card scenario. This might be a relevant security question. In most OpenPGP cases, I don't think it is, but this is up to the working group to see a little bit.
So again, let me ask. So these are things. This is a change we could do, and my guess is this change will add another couple of weeks of discussion, during which we might find yet another change that we could do. So Is anybody really pressing to make this change now, given that that risks us hitting that infinite loop of not getting finished? So if you really want this, can you speak up now? As you said, you really want it, even at the risk of causing a delay that possibly extends infinitely?
Just to make it clear from my side, I'm not pushing for this. It was just a question to make it clear for me. As I already said, I don't want to delay the working group finishing the crypto refresh.
Yeah, I want to just repeat the obvious as we talk about adding more stuff. We cannot recharter until we are done here.
Yes. Okay, so Stavros is not pushing for this and is happier to see progress than this particular change.
And is anybody, if this change were made, is there anybody who's going to seriously complain about it? Just to try to understand what the scope of arguing would be. Like, Aaron, you're in the queue.
I would be happier without this change. So while we can live with it, I would be happier without, because I mean, encrypted forwarding is one reason, and delaying is the second.
Okay, so I'm going to just suggest that perhaps the right thing to do is not to make this change. And nobody's jumping up to contradict that. So I think that's where we kind of land on the minutes of this meeting. And Daniel, if your merge request adheres to that, and if somebody objects on the mailing list to the minutes, then we'll deal with that then. Great. So this is the last breaking one, or
the
whole, Daniel's entire merge request.
Daniel's merge request is not actually breaking any wire formats. The thing that Stavros is proposing would be a change to the.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think again from the notes that we'll Daniel will create a merge request as reflecting this slide deck in the next day or two, and then the editors will process that. Cool.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so next slide deck is open merge requests.
Yep. So
back to DKG. So again, this is kind of a pretty brief summary of the.
Yeah, there's some merge requests that are open that are editorial changes, non-substantive editorial changes. And I'm going to walk through here the merge requests that are the ones that have some amount of substance. It's a very small amount of substance. It's mostly guidance, maybe some tweaking of RFC 2119 keywords, but just want to give folks a heads up here. Next slide. Those are the ones that have editorial changes.
So essentially, these are the set of things that we're proposing that you and Paul just go fix in the next couple of weeks.
Right, and if you have any particular strong concerns about any of these, now is the time to speak up. So merge request 268 recommends or actually mandates setting critical. When you generate these particular subpackets, you should mark them as critical. A subpacket that is marked as critical will be used if it is not understood by the client. It will cause the signature to be rejected, assuming the implementations follow the guidance. So there's a list there. You can check it out on the merge request. There's a little bit of discussion on the merge request. Next slide. There's supposed to be a check mark there, but it didn't work. Primary keys must be able to sign. This is merge request 269. The text is currently ambiguous. It says primary keys must be able to sign. It sort of says if they want to sign, which implies maybe they could be made to, like, non-signing algorithms could work. And this clarifies it to mean the first thing there, which is just primary keys must be able to sign, period. The reason for this requirement is that primary keys need to be able to make self-signatures and certifications. So this just clarifies an ambiguity that I think Jonathan Hamill identified in the text. Next slide. Merge request 271 says an implementation should implement certain subpackets. the draft currently says that an implementation should implement the first 5 on the list that you see on the slide there. And this merge request suggests maybe we also need to say you really should implement the features subpacket, which identifies the type of encryption, or rather the type of decryption you are capable of, so folks know what kind of encryption to send to you. So this says basically we should, while we're recommending implementation of subpackets, features is something that should also be on the list. Next slide. 272 says the self-signature guidance. I believe, Stephen, you identified that the language there is wishy-washy. It actually includes text currently that says something like behave politely, which no one at the IETF knows what that means, though we would like people to.
We have a code of conduct.
We do have a code of conduct, but I don't think it's trying to refer to that. And this basically changes that language to be RFC 2119 language. So please take a look. Tell me if you think, tell the working group either on the mailing list or on the GitLab issue if that's a problem. Next slide. There are 2 registries for the notations in OpenPGP signature subpackets. One of them is about the flags. One of them is about the registered notations in the IANA namespace. The IANA namespace is actually empty. Nobody has anything putting in, so we will just making a note to the IANA. Yeah, yes, we want this registry. Yes, it's also currently empty. And the flag registry has columns that are called security recommended and interoperability recommended that I think nobody really understands. There's only one flag listed anyway. If you look at the merge request, there's some discussion of the history of how those things seem to have crept in, and nobody is advocating for them. So this just rips out those columns that nobody understands and is advocating for. Next slide. This is the last one. Falco is going to give a presentation about some guidance that he's proposing to add about session key reuse. That's 228. He'll follow this talk to explain that in a little bit more detail. And then there's some merge requests for test vectors, because we currently do not have all the test vectors that the draft needs to be able to confirm interoperability. There's 2 merge requests right now, one for a secret key that has been locked with a passphrase, and one with a clear signed message. I believe we also need a test vector that is for encrypted and signed messages. So if you can produce such a test vector, or you can, confirm one that someone else produces, that would be a great thing to propose. There's also this merge request 223, which asks to remove a checksum and padding from version 6 ECDH keys, that with the inclusion of the CFRG curves, this distinction maybe is not needed anymore. It was proposed, and nobody who proposed it seems to really care that much now that we've switched over to the raw CFRG curves. So I think that's probably just going to drop. If you care for it, you need to speak up and advocate for it now. That would actually be a wire change format, and we're trying to not do wire change formats. So I think that's that. I'm going to turn it over to Falco unless folks have questions about the merge requests that I just ran through.
Just a question on the last. So are you proposing to some 223 is merged or not merged?
It is not merged, and I think we are going to not merge it.
Okay, so the proposal is to
drop 223 because the folks who proposed it initially are satisfied with the way that we don't have padding on the new curves. We want to encourage people to use the new stuff.
And does including 223 or dropping 223, which of those is the wire change and which is the status quo?
To merge it would change the wire format.
Okay, so the proposal is don't merge 223.
Don't merge 223 because that will make the way that you deal with ECDH more similar across V4 and V6.
Yeah, and so don't merge it. There will not be a wire format change with our proposed way forward.
Yep.
Cool.
So I don't see anybody in the queue, so I'm going to turn it over to Falco. Falco, are you here? Can you just turn on your mic and say hi?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Great, and your deck is coming up. So if folks have not read the merge request, it's a fairly short and compact set of text about guidance about session key reuse, and Falco's going to explain it in more detail here in this deck. Thanks. Take it away, Falco.
So Falco, do you want me to move the slides forward for you, or would you rather
please.
do that?
Yep.
Okay.
Can I do it?
Just say
how can I do it?
You can do it if you wish. Yeah. 1 second. All the slots requested media are already taken. Okay, no, you can't do it at the moment, I'm afraid. So you'll have to tell me to move
Okay.
forward as needed.
Okay, good. Okay, so the presentation is about the security considerations section that I propose for the session key reuse feature that is introduced in the crypto refresh. Next slide, please. So we are going to look at the background. What is this session key reuse feature? And then, yeah, about avoiding pitfalls, addressing interoperability, and what the requirements that are formulated in the security considerations section that is proposed. Okay, next slide, please. So here you can see the merge request. And we have the session key reuse and the crypto refresh, which is a new feature, which means that contrasting to the previous approach where each new message, even a reply, would create new PKASKs. So here we can reuse PKASKs. And I best explain it on the next slide, which has a visualization. So we see an initial message that has two recipients and a sender. The sender also, of course, encrypts to himself. And you know, a normal reply we would create new PKASKs, and of course also a new symmetric packet. Now with this session key reuse SKR mechanism, we can just reuse the PKASKs. They are sent again unchanged to the previous recipients, respectively the sender. But the symmetric packet is changed. It contains a new salt value. And this salt value is important because if I reuse the session key, of course, normally, okay, well, it's not necessary ultimately to have the salt value. You could also use a different nonce if you wouldn't have the salt, but that would actually have drawbacks because of the nonce space. So the salt value is the correct approach that is proposed here already in the crypto refresh, and this has to be chosen anew for each message. The obvious advantage is that even if I don't have the public keys of the recipients, I can, of the original sender, I can reply to the set of all the recipients, including the sender. The technical ways that it's done in the crypto refresh is that a per message key is derived from the session key and the salt using HKDF, which is also very important independently of this feature, because otherwise you have the problem of downgrade attacks to CFB, which could mean that there are Oracle attacks against even the AEAD modes. Okay, next slide, please. Now we come to the pitfalls, and the basic problem is here that you have now, if you use this feature, you would not using public key encryption anymore. You're basically using symmetric key encryption with a shared symmetric key. And of course, this means if I send a message to, if Alice sends a message to Eve and to Bob, and now Bob only replies to Alice, then also Eve has cryptographic access to this message. If she can get to the encrypted message, she can decrypt it because she has the PKASK, which decrypts to the same session key. Next slide, please. Special cases where the attacker removes himself from the message prior to the one of the recipients, the other recipients receiving it. So here, Alice encrypts to Eve and to Bob, but Eve intercepts the message to Bob, for instance, by accessing his mailbox. She modifies the message. Bob doesn't see that Eve is a recipient of the original message. He replies to Alice only as he thinks, but also Eve can read this message. So the one defense mechanism here would be to use the intended fingerprint, intended recipient fingerprint subpacket if the message is also signed. Okay, next slide, please. Of course, the same applies to replying to more than the original recipients. If I add a recipient in the reply that wasn't the recipient of the initial message, now this additional recipient also has read access to the original message or even further messages. Next slide, please. Then we also have to consider the case that, yeah, I have, for instance, an email client, and I compose a draft that uses the SKR to reply to a message. Now I resume that draft message. Maybe it's now a bit more difficult to have the context of the session key reuse, that to even know that session key reuse was used to compose the original draft. And if my email client tries to behave correctly and warn me about adding or removing recipients to this message, as we've seen, it could be a problem in the previous pitfalls. Now, this raises the question how this can be done, if this can really be done in case of resuming drafts that are stored somewhere. I don't have any means to store additional information with it, like an IMAP. Okay, next slide, please. Then we have the potential use of interfering session key reuse. So let's assume a protocol which deals with very large files. So I have an encrypted file on the disk. I send it to someone, and of course I could just say my client just uses the existing encrypted file, and I share. So I reuse the session key, which by itself is not a problem, because anyway, people that already have access to this file, they can read this file. I send it to someone else, okay, so no problem. But now if this is this protocol also allows session key reuse in the reply, of course, now the replying party doesn't know necessarily that this session key is already shared. Okay, next slide, please. So then interoperability can be a problem if I have a client that supports SKR and I also have a client that doesn't, and I start composing a message with a SKR supporting client and then resume it to send it with a client that doesn't support it. So I don't really, I cannot really predict what will happen. So the non-supporting client may be able to send the message unchanged. It may even be able to send the message changed. So this would be the case if it on the message change, it wouldn't recompute the PKASKs, but only the encrypted data. So also the recipient list could be changed possibly, and this would then mean pitfalls 1 and 2 would apply, which I cannot really prevent because I cannot make any prescriptions for the non-supporting client, of course. Okay, next slide, please. So now we come to the brief summary, what the security consideration section tries to say, additionally to bringing up these potential pitfalls. So signaling of the use of SKR is, I think, necessary in all cases. So, and the user control of this, so you should be able to deactivate it, and whenever it is used, you should be aware of it. Because there might be cases where he doesn't expect it. So you might have a public key of someone, but it expires in between maybe 2 messages. Now you could be even caught in continuous use of the session key reuse unknowingly. That should be prevented. I think it's important. Using slightly different email addresses maybe could be a problem. And then in some application context, not in email, but in others, it might not be clear what is considered a reply, what is considered a new message. So in a messaging client, for instance, you potentially don't have this differentiation. So it would not be clear when the session key reuse would be could be applied and when not. And we also decided to, recommend very strongly that we cannot make a really a should in capital letters, but we are recommending very strongly that an implementer should use guidance documentation for this specific application to use the SKR. That doesn't exist for now, so it would mean that for any application, so it would mean that for now no one would be able to follow this and implement it, which is kind of what we intended here. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. And are there any comments?
So again, just a question: where is this in terms of merge requests or text?
Text is there.
In a merge request.
It's in a merge request.
Not merged yet.
Not merged.
Okay. You don't have a number in your head?
I have to go back.
Okay. So we have text for this as a merge request. We don't seem to have any comments on it now. It seems like, reducing the danger of a dangerous implement. So that seems like sensible security considerations text. And again, this will be one of the things we're proposing that the editors merge and apply any editorial changes needed.
Yeah. If anyone is super sad by this text, speak up, but clarify what you want done differently if it's wrong.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any objections. I think we'll indicate the meeting seems happy to go ahead and do that. So thank you, Falco.
Thank you.
Right. That's all of our crypto refresh stuff, is it?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so that's all the crypto refresh changes happened, changes in works. And again, our proposal is that Paul and DKG will spend a couple of weeks executing those changes and tiddling up the various bits of editorial change that get found in the meantime. Bring the document back to the produce a 09 it will be. Produce 09. We let the working group have a few days to sanity check 09, and then hit publication request and declare victory on the working group last call. So that's our plan. Does anybody have a comment on that plan or an objection? If you support the plan, there's no need to comment. But if anybody has an objection or a concern, now's the time to express it.
You can support the plan in the chat if you want to.
Yeah, we don't want to chew into the time for some rechartering discussions. Not hearing that, we'll take it that's the plan, and hopefully DKG and Paul will get some time to do that. And then we were going to just have some updates on interoperability and then rechartering. So that's the SOP one first?
Yep.
Great.
So Daniel again. So we want to not just produce a new draft, we want to produce a new draft with implementations that can work. And the interoperability test suite depends on this stateless OpenPGP command line interface to work. And I wanted to mention, just to highlight a couple of things that have been updated with that will make it a little bit easier to test the new features. So next slide, please. This is background about what the stateless command line interface is. It's called SOP, for Stateless OpenPGP. I'm going to skip over this at the moment in the interest of time. It's a command line interface. You can do things like this, and everybody who implements it can then have their tools be tested against each other. So we're using it for interop. What's added that's useful for this draft is a profile option to both the generate key subcommand and the encrypt subcommand. So if you're an implementer, we hope that you will implement this because it will make the test suite better able to do interop testing with the different versions that have been out there. So we have the basic idea is you say generate key and you specify the name of the draft that you're using, and you can define the different profiles that your version of SOP supports, and it should follow the standard that the user has specified. Now this is just for generate key and for encrypt. The other things don't need any profiles because they should just work based on the objects that they're dealing with. So generate key says I want one that looks like a crypto refresh key versus like a 4880 key. And encrypt says, for example, when I'm using a password to do symmetric key encryption, should I be using the SCIPD version 2 or should I be using something else? You can choose, if the user doesn't provide a profile, you can choose what you want your default to be. But we want to be able to tell a SOP implementation, please exercise, your generating side of the code that follows these particular drafts. So this is just to ease testing of the interop. Next slide. So these profile names should mean what they say. There's a little bit of subtlety with SOP encrypt. You can read the draft to see what the subtlety is, in particular, how it deals, if you say encrypt using this fancy new stuff, but you're only encrypting to a key that claims it doesn't support any fancy new stuff, you should probably obey what the key preferences say. If you want to come up with crazy namespaces, a crazy profile for yourself that gives you extra special features, you can do that too. So you can tell people, hey, check this thing out, I can generate this. The names for the profiles is sort of like the OpenPGP notation namespace. Next slide. And you can interrogate a SOP implementation and say, what profiles do you support? And it will tell you. So you say SOP list profiles for the subcommand that you care about, and it'll tell you, this is an example where a SOP implementation says, I support 4880, I support the crypto refresh 08, and I support my own wacky feature. Please don't do more than 4. Keep it simple. The goal of SOP is simplicity and interoperability.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. The default stuff is details. Don't worry about it. You can also announce the version of the SOP specification that your SOP implementation supports. This is trying to make things a little bit more forward compatible, so we can add new features to SOP and test better. You don't need to do this yet, but start with the profiles if you haven't added this to your SOP implementation yet. Next.
That's it?
That's it. Great. So next we have a report from Eustace, who is running the interoperability test suite, which tests, well, Eustace can tell us how many implementation it tests. Eustace, can you pick up?
Hello, I'm Justus Winter. Next slide, please. So I've been running the Interop test suite since 2019. It has been a couple of fun years. By now we have around 117 tests and I guess around 1,300 test vectors. And we're testing, I think, 10 different implementations. They are not all different. Some are families, like we are testing 3 versions of GNU-PG, for example. I think it has been very, very successful. So it improved a lot of implementations and improved our understanding of the ecosystem and where implementations lack guidance. And this has been, I think, valuable feedback for the working group. And I think one of the more successful parts of it is its spin-off, the stateless OpenPGP protocol. I don't know what the P actually stands for. So I'm very, very happy about that. Next slide, please. In terms of testing the crypto refresh, not a lot has happened, but we do include the test vectors from the draft. And if you go to the main test results, the tests are included in in all the tests. But currently we run only the released versions of implementations, and so far they don't support a lot of the crypto refresh. I've made a special result page. If you go to the address and then add /v6 HTML, you only see the subset of the tests that use v6 features. And I'm thinking that if people come to me and say, we have a work in progress implementation, it's here, this is how you can build it, then I will include it in this set of tests. And if we look at the right, currently the only kind of implemented v6 feature is an PGPainless, which is an implementation based on Bouncy Castle. And what they do implement is Argon 2 in V4, in the V4 context. Next slide, please. So if you want to help, that would be great. You can suggest tests, write tests, and I guess review tests and test results. That's a lot of work, actually. You can help with the development and maintenance of the test suite itself. If you have an OpenPGP implementation and want to get it in, please do implement SOP. It's not a big interface to implement. Tell me how to build it and keep it up to date. Implement the new -- profile and the easiest way to get the implementation to me is to get it into Debian. All right, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesus, and thanks for doing all that interop work. Hopefully that'll start to accumulate as as we get through towards IETF last call and RFC and so on. Great. Okay, so that's our crypto refresh segment done.
An interrupt section.
An interrupt session. So we're now in the slightly optimistic thinking about rechartering, even though we haven't hit that publication request yet. Did we want to do this off the agenda initially, or?
I think let's do, Daniel submitted some slides, so maybe we'll start with those.
Well, so we have 25 minutes in total.
Right, so Daniel, how much are you expecting to take up with your slides?
But let's, don't we have a list that has like everything in the list just initially? Then we can go into Daniel's slides.
Okay.
Where is that list?
It's in the agenda, so.
Okay, so I should share the. So bear with me 1 second. That. PGP. No, I haven't shared yet. Okay, that's the list there. So I can do a screen share. Hopefully I'm sharing the same right window. Okay, so we just in our text agenda, we had basically posted a list of recharging topics. Could probably make that a bit bigger for people. And this, I think, is the list that we accumulated from mails to the list, and we sent out a request to people to send mail to the chairs. There was a couple of them came that way, and there's a few of them came as issues from GitLab. So given that we have like 20 minutes or so, what's the best way of doing it? Let's just go down from the top, I guess, right?
Okay.
So let's, we won't finish this today, but it would be useful to get a sense of who thinks which are most important. So if you think one of these is the most important, feel free to jump in the queue. Otherwise, we'll just proceed down. Yes, we have advice from an area director. Great.
Yeah, I might suggest like sprints of some sort. Like these would be the things that are first. These are the things that could kind of happen next. I mean, maybe just 2 categories.
Yeah, sure. So if you're commenting on that list, then yeah, please say what is your top 2 things, or something like that. I presume a lot of people are keen on doing something about post-quantum cryptography. We don't need to decide what precisely then.
There is actually a draft right now.
Sure.
That is proposed, but the working group can't currently adopt because it's not in charter. But I think there is definitely interest in work there. There's links. If you take a look at this agenda online, you can find links to all of these topics. I tried to make sure there was a link for everything. Almost everything has a link there.
So automatic forwarding is covered in slides from Daniel, yes?
I believe it's in Daniel's slides as well.
Okay,
yeah.
so we'll just skip that one momentarily.
Yeah. So key superseded is a way to indicate that you have upgraded your key and switched to a new key. It's a relatively simple signaling mechanism. There's an issue in GitLab about it. That's something that the working group could decide to include in its topics as a way to facilitate transition to the new material.
So this block is probably covered in Daniel's slides?
It is.
Okay.
I'll just mention these other ones briefly. I know that there's a number of people who are sad that the designated revoker is deprecated. In particular, Phil Zimmerman particularly wants to see a functional designated revoker. We deprecated it because it is a gross fingerprint thing that doesn't actually get you the designated revoker key. There's actually a already text that describes how to do this. It would be pretty simple to do. User ID clarifications is basically the user IDs. The draft has said for years that user IDs are email addresses, but they're not. It says they're by convention but actually the convention is different. If you do a survey of what user IDs are out there, they are not RFC 2822 mail addresses, so a clarification of that could potentially be in charter. this first party attestation for third party certifications. So that's a way that if I have an OpenPGP certificate, anybody can, of course, certify my user ID on it. But I may not want every single person in the world to certify my user ID because my certificate will get very large. This is a flooding attack that's been known on the key servers. One way around that is to have these first-party attested third-party certifications so that when you distribute a certificate, only the things the key holder wants distributed with it go with it. It's a way to pare down the flooding attack while still allowing third-party certifications to be redistributed. So that's to try to help the key servers. That could be in scope.
So I just typed into the chat, and for people in the room, please join the queue if you'd like to comment or on these items on this list, because we have limited time and we'd love to get some feedback on this. So join the queue if you have opinions. I don't know if we'll have time for Daniel's presentation, in fact, because
I'm going to try to blow through these so that we have room for Daniel's. Just the last ones that are listed here. They're all marked DKG because I'm mentioning them, but I often pulled them out of existing merge requests or other places.
Sure, I'm suggesting maybe that we let Daniel speak to this list and then try and get more feedback as opposed to more slides. Just as in a use. Sorry, Daniel, I think it might be better use of our time. We will come back to this, but yeah. So please join the queue if you. I'm not seeing anybody joining the queue. So if you don't want to recharter, then that's fine. If you want to recharter,
I see Aaron in the queue now. Aaron.
So let Daniel finish his list through and be joining the queue right now to get in there.
So there's a bunch of proposals for tweaks to the Web of Trust. That is the OpenPGP network of identity certifications that involve things like regular expression packets and trust signatures and validation constraints and subkeys that can certify other keys. We could move SOP into the working group. I'm currently maintaining it as an individual draft that is not aiming for RFC status, but if the working group wants to adopt it, they could. The thing that Falco published that says, hey, watch out for session key reuse. You need guidance for that. We have no guidance. So the working group could decide to try to take on some guidance for how to do that safely with email, maybe a signaling mechanism, maybe other guidance. And then currently, I don't think you can use V6 in PGP MIME because you need to include something in the multi-part signed messages. So we would need to modify that.
Okay, so Daniel, do you want to just give us like 2 minutes on the list of items that have your name on them on this list? Or even 1 minute would be better.
Sure. So first of all, I do agree that PQC should be the top priority actually. But then, I think automatic forwarding also is an important and interesting topic. And then long-term symmetric keys as well, I think would be very useful for encrypting data that's only for yourself, send messages, drafts, and so on, and would actually also help with the PQC efforts, since symmetric crypto is less susceptible. So I think among the topics that have my name on it, I would say long-term symmetric keys is one of the higher priority ones, perhaps. Then domain separation is a fairly small thing to bind signatures and encrypted messages to a specific context, like a specific application, or in the case of email, a specific email thread or something like that, that I also think is quite important. And then forward secrecy has been a topic for a while. I think it's still an open question whether we need to do something specific like double ratcheting or use existing mechanisms like short-term keys, and then we can also use the symmetric keys for that. Then key verification is a topic that repeatedly came up also in the design team, and we want to have something better than verifying fingerprints manually, obviously. So, well, we've presented on key transparency before, and there was also a BOF this morning about it. So I think long term that might be interesting to look at that, or something simpler like using QR codes to verify keys. Would I think be interesting to look at as well.
Great. So again, in the interest of time and to get kind of more feedback, I think we can take it as read that we will be discussing what to do about post-quantum cryptography. So unless you oppose doing work on that, there's really no need to speak on that topic now. We will revisit it. I would bet that we will at least talk about rechartering to do something with fingerprints, because we've talked about it so often. So again, we probably don't need to spend time on that now. So again, if you jump in the queue, please, if you have other of these or things that are not on here that you think should be part of rechartering. And again, keep jumping in the queue till we run out of time. And we currently have Justice.
So I'd like to add to the list first. We want a way to share certificates between implementations and preferably also share trust roots so that different implementations on the same machine can make consistent decisions and share certificates, like that is done for different TLS stacks, for example.
Okay. Great. So if I could bother our note taker to try and capture more of this than previous stuff, great. Is there an existing issue on that, Justice, or?
Well, we started writing a draft, and we are happy to update that and bring that in.
Fantastic. So yeah, if you're happy to write a draft in the next number of weeks or thereabouts, then that certainly sounds like a topic that people would be interested in looking at. Any more from you, Justice?
Yes. Second, I would like to see semantics discussed and harmonized. For example, what does it mean for a signature to be valid? In relation, for example, to the issuing certificate.
Okay.
Is there a draft that looks like this? It'll be easier to discuss something if we can see an example of what what the shape of it is.
Right. I don't think that has been written down. I don't know.
Okay. So would it be possible to kind of create an issue in the GitLab for that? But is that the right way to take it for now?
Yeah, I can do that.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. So are we getting feedback then that this list, modulo the couple of additions that Justice suggests, is a superset of what we might want to do? I asked the wrong question. Sorry, I should have said. Is it wrong to say that this list plus Justice's 2 additions is a superset of what we don't want to do? If that's a wrong statement, then please let us know. So generally, I mean, again, we might discover a bit more as we go. So it looks like what we need to do then is figure out what we mean by post-quantum crypto for this. And there is a draft with a link there off that page, off the agenda. The other ones I think are pretty concrete, except for fingerprints. Because I think there's lots of ideas about fingerprints, but I'm not sure I've ever heard somebody confidently saying they know the right answer. Aaron, perhaps you're about to enlighten us.
So also the key superseded, I think we had a concrete proposal, but that's definitely not the only way we can go. So basically there could be also some solutions onto the key distribution layer as WKD or keys.openpgp.org. And that also has to do with fingerprints because we want to refer to the new key. What is it? So I think that is also very open, even though there is a concrete proposal.
So you mentioned WKD. Do you think something like WKD is something you would want to consider in the superset that Stephen's describing? You can say no.
Yes.
It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I would like to see it. On the other hand, I think there is indeed things that I would like to work more on. So I don't want. I would like to see. I don't want to volunteer for it. So
Well, that's it. That's the kind of useful information we will want, I think. Yeah. And I guess also play there is that the Keytrans BOF that happened here today. I wasn't at the end of that. Was it your BOF, Roman?
It was.
You can probably tell us what happened.
This was a non-working group forming BOF, so we talked about the KT concept. We got to the point where we felt like there's general agreement that we understood what the problem was. There was interest in the IETF to work on it. We had folks willing to work on it in the IETF, and we agreed in broad strokes on a number of the design principles, but we still needed to talk about some others. So the answer is we're going to make a charter, going to grind it out in the concrete and see where we are and what we need to do to talk more about that charter.
And would it be your sense that the rechartering of this working group and that chartering process, they're going to be overlapping, right? Assuming that we recharted this working group. Overlapping.
Oh yeah, in terms of timing, sure.
Yeah. Okay. And then so it's a thing for people to do would be to consider is there anything on this list that you might prefer to be handled in Keytrans or have something in common with Keytrans or not?
I'd have to look at some of the details. Nothing kind of jumps out at me like, oh no, we got to make sure we don't do that. I think we just work in parallel because part of it, I just don't know where we're going to end up with the scope for Keytrans.
Right.
If we're even going to find consensus to move forward with it.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we don't know. But I think at least the fingerprinting stuff. Yeah. It's got whether we can add yet another standard.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think we should just move forward kind of here, and we'll be kind of sensitive to for Keytrans to kind of think about this. I mean, we have momentum. I want to do nothing to stop the momentum of kind of good ideas here.
Okay, Justus.
Right. I also thought about web of trust semantics. So currently the spec gives us mechanisms to implement the web of trust, but the semantics have been left to implementations to figure out, and PGP and GNU-PG are notable examples of implementations. And we have another one, and we also have a spec that details and gives concrete guidance for implementers and semantics. And that could also be a topic of interest for the working group.
Okay, thank you. Aaron?
Quickly back to the Keytrans. I think that the key transparency that at least at Proton we're actually deploying right now is very much in line with what was presented this morning at the BOF. So I would consider that at least that part should be like grouped up. So if the BOF actually ends up rechartering something significant, we should probably wait for them to produce something before we redo the same work in OpenPGP.
Yeah, again, I don't know kind of the details of what we're kind of thinking about here. I like the idea of coming up with the list we want. This one is kind of set aside, recognizing that it's special because we have the equity consideration for the working group, and we can figure out where to do the work between the two working groups.
Great.
Oh, I'm sorry, presupposing we move forward with Keytrans.
We're in optimistic mode at the minute. Okay, thanks, Aaron. Daniel?
Yeah, just since you mentioned WKD, I thought I should say that since it's something that's being used, and we also deployed both serving and looking up keys on WKD, then even though I think it's mostly done. I mean, there's some new things we could do, but indeed, it might be valuable to at least have it as a formal RFC at some point.
Okay, I think that we've drained the queue on that, which is great. So I guess probably the right thing that it seems to do is let's get that publication requested button hit, the crypto refresh. And the day after we do that, we'll have a beverage, and then probably start to schedule a call to look at turning this set of lists into a possible draft charter that we can suggest for rechartering. And Roman is nodding there, so I'm guessing that he's kind of more or less happy that we hit publication request and then get into the process of rechartering. So he's nodding to say, yes, that's good. So that would probably be, again, optimistically, if we get that publication request button hit in the next couple of weeks or shortly thereafter, that'd be setting up a call to discuss chartering topics, and probably I guess we would need to find somebody to write a 0.0 draft charter, right?
The admin GitLab repo has the current working group charter. So if
Yes.
somebody wants to take a stab at editing that, we could start that way.
Okay, so the day after we hit publication request, the chairs will start telling people, here's the place to go to suggest your text in GitLab on the admin repo, which I can't remember any more details, but it exists and we'll point you at it.
Right.
Yep. And then we'll organize a call where we can discuss in more detail. There's a bunch of, as I say, if this is of interest, then there are lots of links there in the agenda for this session. Please have a look at them as you get time. Consider which ones you'd be more interested in working on, which ones you as Aaron said, you might like but are not going to devote cycles to, and we can kind of go from there, I think.
And if you really want to demonstrate interest in your favorite one of these rechartering topics, the clearest way to do that is to write an individual draft right now, so you can explain to people, this is the thing that I want to see happen, and I've demonstrated that I'm doing the work to advance it.
Right. And then I guess we'll talk to Roman. I guess it might make sense to try and winnow this list in various ways, or to just pick the top couple off the list and then propose that as a chartering item and see how we get on. We'll talk to our area director about what looks like a good way forward in terms of going from the list of people's ideas and interests to what might get approved by the ISG. I think that's the end of our agenda.
With 3 minutes to spare.
With 3 minutes to spare. So if anybody has anything more and wants to join I don't see it. So thank you all. We're almost there. Rowan.
Last words, AD, last words.
I know we haven't hit pub rec, but hopefully we'll hit it before we see each other in person. I actually want to applaud the working group. I mean, we've reopened with kind of very strict gates about what we needed to finish, and nothing else was happening. And I really kind of want to compliment the group, how it's worked together to kind of get us to the finish line. And I'm really excited that we're talking about further kind of evolution. I mean, this is a critical piece of technology for us. So, really kind of kudos and thanks for all the hard work.
Thank you. And thanks for your help helping us along the way. Okay, great. Thanks, folks. We'll be in touch on the mailing list. And thanks to our minute taker. And I guess it's a coffee break now. So go get cookies.
For the pleasure.
Yes. Thank you.